My name is Efrem Smith. I'm one of the pastors here. That is so awesome. They're actually going to be showing a video during the Kings game tonight of our worship team singing that song to commemorate the national holiday recognizing Martin Luther King Jr. That is so awesome, so awesome. We're in a sermon series on the book of Proverbs. If you're just joining us, you are not too late. We just started it last week, so you can catch up through our YouTube channel, our website, or our podcast. But if you're joining us, you are right on time. It is packed in here, not a seat left in this room. They just pulled out the bleachers in the overflow room. So it's packed over and over. What's up, Overflow? Good to see y'all. If you're watching online, if you got any seats available in your house, we will send people to you because we still need some seats. But man, we are more blessed than we deserve at Midtown Church. More blessed than we deserve. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into this series here on the book of Proverbs, Wisdom to Live by. Celebrating the national holiday, recognizing the life of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement that he was a part of leading. He's a significant leader in that movement, though that movement is so much bigger than him. Ralph Abernathy, John Lewis, Andrew Young, Diane Nash, Fannie Lou Hamer, so many people that were willing to say no justice, no peace, to cry for freedom. That mantra, no justice, no peace, was connected during the civil rights movement in part to nonviolent resistance. Now, unfortunately, at times, that mantra was also connected to violent responses to injustice. But even in that example, we shouldn't allow that to cause us to separate justice and peace. Biblically, from a God perspective, justice should usher in peace. When justice reigns, peace should reign. So it is true, if there's no justice, there is no peace. And there's no peace without justice. And these two words scripturally are paired together. Together, justice and peace should lead to a greater understanding of transformation, a greater realization of liberation, because justice and peace should not be separated. But don't just trust me. Let's go to the book of Proverbs, chapter 29, beginning with verse 4, where King Solomon speaks to leadership and justice. It says in Proverbs 29, verse 4, by justice a king gives a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. You could preach a whole sermon just on that verse right there. By justice a king gives a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. Those who flatter their neighbors are spreading nets for their feet. Evildoers are snared by their own sin, but the righteous shout for joy and are glad. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. Mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn away anger. If a wise person goes to court with a fool, the fool rages and scoffs, and there is no peace. The bloodthirsty hate a person of integrity and seek to kill the upright. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. If a ruler listens to lies, all his officials become wicked. The poor and the oppressor have this in common. The Lord gives sight to the eyes of both. If a king judges the poor with fairness, his throne will be established forever. From these words from King Solomon, I want to preach to you on the title, Wisdom and Justice. Wisdom and Justice. God, I pray this would be your message. God, you preach. Let me just be your vessel that you would use to say what you want to say to these, your beloved children, my sisters and brothers. I want to handle your word correctly. So please let it be done. In Jesus' name, amen. Wisdom and justice. Martin Luther King Jr. had a distinctive way in which he led a movement to pursue justice. What was at the core of his distinctive way in pursuing justice is something called nonviolent resistance. A nonviolent response to injustice, even when that injustice has violent expressions to spread itself. He believed that the response to injustice was nonviolent resistance. What this looked like was people sitting at lunch counters where colored people couldn't sit and be willing to have hot coffee spilled on them, poured on them, be spit at, be slapped, be pushed, and yet not respond with violence. I was at the Civil and Human Rights Museum in Atlanta, Georgia last year, and there's actually a counter you can sit at, and you can put headphones on and put your hands on this counter, and you close your eyes, and it's supposed to kind of simulate what people went through sitting at lunch counters in the Deep South during this time. And I could hardly sit there for 2 minutes, and it wasn't even real. It was like, but the counter would vibrate, and just in the headphones, people would cuss you out and yell at you, call you names, and say what they were going to do to you. And I could hardly do it. But yet there were people that were willing in Birmingham, in Montgomery, in Selma, in other parts of Georgia to sit places and be willing to have violence put on them and respond nonviolently. Many people say that King, he adopted this strategy from Gandhi. And that is in part true. That the religious expression from which Gandhi comes from, his philosophy, this influenced King. But also a Christian mystic theologian named Howard Thurman influenced King as well. Someone named Dr. Mordecai Johnson, Dr. Benjamin E. Mays also influenced King, but the Bible influenced King. Yes, because King used the phrase many times, the beloved community. This is the way he shared his vision for the civil rights movement. And he once said, the end of all this, what he hoped for, the end is redemption and reconciliation. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. He said this in a sermon called An Experiment in Love. But also in the book, Strength to Love, he talked about that to deal with racial injustice, it would take a force of love. And this force of love is beautifully expressed, King said, in the love of Christ Jesus. He believed that the reconciliation, the redemption, the restoration that takes place in the love theology of Jesus was powerful enough not only to liberate people out of injustice, but even to transform the heart of the oppressor themselves. He believed that liberation, that this kind of transformative love that would lead to equality could also lead to a second conversion in people that said they believed in Jesus but weren't fully living out the gospel of Jesus. So King was deeply rooted in the Word of God in his strategy of nonviolent resistance. This leads me to the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs providing words on wisdom regarding justice. The book of Proverbs providing wisdom regarding justice. The book of Proverbs is part of what is known as the wisdom literature in the Bible. Proverbs centers the wisdom of God. It compares and contrasts wise and foolish, righteous and wicked, justice and evil. Much of Proverbs is written by King Solomon. Many scholars, theologians believe he wrote the first 29 chapters of the book of Proverbs. That means that the text that I read to you in the opening of this message, that text is the last part of Proverbs that King Solomon rights. These are the final words of King Solomon, at least within the book of Proverbs, to his son. It's interesting that he would end all the things that he wants to say to his son about wisdom and godliness. He would end talking about justice. Why would he do this? Well, one, maybe he's thinking that this son might be his successor. This son might be the one who follows him to the throne. One day he will be king over all of Israel. And so he's closing out these words of wisdom, these godly words to a son who might become king himself one day. And he ends by talking about the importance of wisdom and justice, leading justly. King Solomon also, though, is participating in the Bible's narrative of justice and nonviolent resistance to injustice. Why would I say this? Yes, the Bible does have some scenes of violence. We can't get away from them. I scratch my head. I put question marks in my Bible sometimes when I see Cain killing Abel, when I see what happens even in the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah, the judgment of the flood, even when I see that even when God liberates slaves from Egypt, he parts the Red Sea, but it closes too on some folks. And so there are some scenes of violence in the Bible, but there's also a narrative that points to Jesus of nonviolence and love. A nonviolent resistance to injustice is biblical. How do I know this? Consider the book of Daniel. Daniel one day finds himself the object of the bad public policy of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. A law is passed that you cannot pray publicly to the one true God. What does Daniel do? He responds to this unjust law through nonviolent resistance against it. In the middle of the afternoon, he opens the windows of his house and prays so everybody can see him. Nonviolent resistance to bad public policy, nonviolent resistance to injustice. He's arrested for this and he's thrown in a lion's den for it. He is put before the mouths of hungry lions, potentially having violence, having brutality put on his body, but he's willing to do this. He's willing to have this unjust violence perpetrated on his being, maybe snatch his very life for him because of his faith in God. His faith in God leads him to nonviolent resistance to systemic injustice. But don't just look at the story of Daniel. What about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Another bad law is passed in Babylon saying that you can't worship the one true God. The Jews are supposed to separate themselves from the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God that brought their people out of slavery. They're supposed to not worship that God anymore. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego nonviolently break an unjust law, and they worship God anyway. They get arrested. They get thrown in a fiery furnace. I bet they wish for the Birmingham jail that King was in. They were thrown in a fiery furnace. They lived to tell about it. The Bible gives us stories like Esther. Another law was passed, this time in Assyria, that would have killed all of her people. And she told her people, she didn't tell them, go riot in the street, throw a garbage can through the Target window. No, she didn't tell them that. She told them to nonviolently go fast and pray for her, and she would risk her life to confront the king about this unjust law. Nonviolent resistance to injustice is biblical. It's wise. And she saved her people. So King is not just leaning on Gandhi, he's leaning on Bible. King Solomon, in his writings about justice in the 29th chapter of Proverbs, joins in to this biblical call to nonviolent resistance to injustice. So the question becomes, will we participate? Will Christians today participate lovingly, humbly, prayerfully, strategically in addressing injustice? Here's the question this part of Proverbs calls us to wrestle with. Here's the big question. Is it wise for the Christian to pursue justice? That's the question we should wrestle with in this message. But it's a question we should wrestle with every day of our lives if we say we follow Jesus. Is it wise for the Christian to pursue justice? I say if it's biblical, it is. If it's biblical to pursue justice, the Christian should pursue justice. If God is a God of justice, the people of God should pursue justice. So I'm going to try to attempt to answer this question biblically. So I want to go to point one. One of the ways that we can find wisdom and justice is by realizing, point one, Solomon as a wise and just king. Solomon as a wise and just king. So here in Proverbs 29, Solomon concludes what many people believe is his contribution to the book of Proverbs with these words on justice. Let's go back to Proverbs 29, beginning with verse 4. By justice, a king gives a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. Oh, Lord. I'm reading Bible now. No, don't take me out of context. It says, by justice, a king gives a country stability. That means if you're mayor, if you're on the city council, if you're on the school board, if you're the public school superintendent, if you're the governor, if you're a senator, if you're a state assemblyman, if you're a congressperson, if you're the president, if you want to bring stability to your country, you bring stability to a country by leading justly. But if you're leading based on the people that bought you in the political process, you're not going to be a just leader. I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Green Party, Libertarian, Independent. Every political leader has to decide, are you going to lead justly and righteously, or are you going to just lead on the money train? Are you going to be led by bribes, or are you going to be led by justice and righteousness? Political leaders have to decide. Solomon wrote this. I didn't write this. He went on and said, those who flatter their neighbors are spreading nets for their feet. Evildoers are snared by their own sin, but the righteous shout for joy and are glad. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. He's saying righteous leaders, righteous kings, they care about the poor. They care about the needy. They care about the marginalized. They care about the widow. They care about the orphan. They care about the foreigner. They care about the slave. They care about the left behind. They care about the outcast. The righteous and just leader cares, but the wicked have no such concern. They didn't run for office for all that. Mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn away anger. If a wise person goes to court with a fool, the fool rages and scoffs, and there is no peace. The bloodthirsty hate a person of integrity and seek to kill the upright. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. If a ruler listens to lies, all his officials become wicked. That means if a leader is sitting on lies, the whole administration's sitting on lies. The whole cabinet's sitting on lies. Every single department under the lying leader is sitting on lies. So the ruler, the king, the leader of the nation has to sit on truth so that all the administration that is connected to that person is on truth. But if that person is connected to lies, then the entire administration and all the officials around them is on lies. I didn't write this. Don't argue with me. Don't argue with Lil Rev. Argue with lots of Bible. Man, I'm just reading this. I'm just reading it. Verse 13 says, the poor and the oppressor have this in common. The Lord gives sight to the eyes of both. Okay, the poor and the oppressed can see what's going on. So don't say you don't see what's going on in under-resourced communities, because God gave you eyes too. Don't say you don't see what's going on with the undocumented. Don't say you don't see what's going on with the unhoused. Don't say you don't know what's going on in under-resourced public schools. You got eyes. Get in your car, drive and look. Verse 14. If a king judges the poor with fairness, his throne will be established forever. Solomon writes this. Why? Because his heart is to be a wise and just king. And his hope is that whatever child follows him as the next king would also be a wise and just leader. Where did this come from? How did Solomon start leading like this? Well, to know that, you have to go to 1 Kings chapter 3. In 1 Kings chapter 3, beginning with verse 5, it says this. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. He's about to start his kingship. He's about to begin his administration. I don't know. He's being inaugurated as king of Israel. And God says, before you start, ask me whatever you think you need to be the king of Israel. This is what's going on. So in verse 6, Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child. I do not know how to carry out my duties. What humility. He's saying, I'm king, but there's a lot of responsibility. All these people, all these issues. I got to oversee the military affairs. I got to oversee foreign affairs. I got to oversee the economy. I got to oversee how we structure the arts and religion. I have all these people reporting to me, waiting for me to tell them what to do. That's what he's really saying in his heart. I am only a little child. I do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment and administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. Wait a minute. This tells me if I ask God for the right stuff, God will give me some other stuff. But I got to ask him for the right stuff first. Because Solomon didn't say, give me wealth, because he didn't say, give me more power, because he didn't say, give me rulership over even more countries and more territories, but he asked for a discerning heart. He asked for a wisdom that goes beyond your thinking, your knowledge, into your heart, into the depths of your soul. I want to have wisdom, God. That's what I want. And so God said, because you asked for the right stuff, I'm going to give you other stuff you didn't even ask for, because some of us start out asking God for the wrong stuff. You want more money, but if he gave it to you, what would you do with it? You want a bigger house, but if God gave it to you, what would you do with it? It would just be more cluttered rooms than the cluttered rooms you have in the small house you have right now. You tore up the last car you had, and you want God to give you a new car, and the car you got is funky. So you're asking God for stuff. Maybe you need to ask him for wisdom and knowledge and patience and grace and forgiveness and love. Ask him for the right stuff, and then he might give you some of the other stuff. My God, let me get back to the text. So he said, verse 14, and if you walk in obedience, not only do you have to ask God for the right stuff when you pray, you have to be obedient to God once God gives you what you asked for. Because some people ask God for stuff, and once they get it, they forgot about the God they asked for it in the first place. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Wow. So Solomon is a wise and just king because he asked God for it. So now that he has this wisdom to administer justice, what's the first issue that King Solomon deals with? To try out this administering of justice. What's the first thing he has to do? Is it foreign affairs? Does he have to make some decisions about Babylon and Egypt and Assyria and Persia? Does he have to make some decisions about the economic infrastructure of the nation of Israel? Does he have to make decisions on what housing is going to look like and what flowing water is going to look like? Does he have to make decisions militarily? Do they have to defend themselves against the threats of other nations, other armies? What does he have to deal with? First case he gets before him is 2 prostitutes. 2 women of the evening. That's how they say it down in Louisiana. Wait a minute, what? Yes, let's go back to 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 16. It says, now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, pardon me, my lord. This woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone, and there was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. I'm just reading it with kind of the emphasis I think this sister would say. She put him by her breast, put her dead son by my breast. Then the next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I born. The other woman said, no, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours. Why am I doing this? Don't take all this. The first one insisted, no, the dead one is yours, the living one is mine. And so they argued before the king. This is the king. This then turned into Judge Judy. This then turned into Judge Joe Brown. Then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword for the king. Then he gave this order. Cut the living child in 2. Give half to one and half to the other. The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son and said to the king, please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him. The other one said, neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king gave his ruling. Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother. When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. Okay, this king has got to be busy. So the first time he administers justice to people in the nation he's ruler over is 2 prostitutes. What? Not some military. He could have said, why can't my secretary of the Department of Prostitution handle that? Why can't my Department of Nighttime Activities oversee that issue? Why is he taking that case? Why did he allow 2 prostitutes to come into the palace, into his space, so that he could offer a just verdict over their predicament? Maybe it's because God is saying just and wise leaders don't just listen to the issues of the rich. They don't just listen to oligarchs. They don't just listen to the powerful. They make space to administer justice for the prostitute, for the drug addict, for the incarcerated, for the left behind, for the one that didn't do right, but they still cry for justice. Because the issue is all of us in here been more ratchet than righteous. We are all in need of God to show enough compassion to offer a verdict on the predicament and troubles and calamities of our sinful, broken lives. I'm in need of a king that will offer a verdict better than what I can do for myself. We need a king that doesn't just hear the cries of Pharaoh, but hears the cries of a prostitute. That's justice. When the king cares for the less fortunate among the people that he leads, when he doesn't just think about the people in power, but he thinks about the people in poverty. Because why were these women prostitutes in the first place? Why was they prostitutes in the first place? And I'm not condoning it. I'm not justifying what they did. But I'm saying, could it be that some of the unjust systems and structures in which they lived created social gaps and social disparities in such a way that they thought the only way they could make a living was by being at the brothel, living in the same house, sharing the rent? Now, let me tell you something about Solomon. Solomon had 300 wives, I believe, and concubines. They were not fortunate enough to get picked as one of his wives. They were not fortunate enough to get picked even as a girlfriend. What is up with King Solomon? He went on The Bachelor and said, I choose all y'all. All y'all, come on. That's wrong. I shouldn't even done that. That's wrong. A pastor should never walk like, if you see a pastor in the street walking like this, don't join their church. Don't join a church with a pastor that walk like this. You want some Jesus? You want some Jesus? No, don't do that. Don't join that church. I'm glad that Bob walks upright. Let him make sure. Let him like stand up straight. No. Okay, wait a minute, okay. What I'm trying to say here is that even though Solomon was a just leader, we see his flaws. We see his flaws. Dr. Martin Luther King was a great man, but yet he had some issues too. Don't we all, though? Be careful who you point fingers at. Don't we all? Here's the issue. Do you know in this story who's really crying for justice? The baby. In this story, the one who's really crying for justice is the baby. Which means if you're going to be a wise and just leader, you have to be willing to hear the cries of the people that can't barely get to cry out. You ever had that cry where you was like, ah! Ah! Like you couldn't even, some of y'all didn't get timeouts as a kid, so you know what I'm talking about. Some of y'all didn't get, bring me your laptop, Jimmy. Some of y'all didn't get that. I wish I'd have got that punishment. I was at home ducking skillets. I meant to say, yes, ma'am. That's what I meant to say. A just and wise leader has to hear the cries of people that don't even have the energy anymore to cry out. They're too young. They don't even know that if you cry out, there's a just answer that will come their way. I got to get out of point one. Solomon, as a wise and just leader, but sisters and brothers, because Solomon was wise and just and flawed, I didn't give you this point to point you to Solomon. I gave you this point to point to the one that Solomon is really trying to point his kids to. Because point two is this: God as a more just king. We need a king that is more just than Solomon, who had multiple wives and concubines. We need a more just king than David. We sing the song "Dance Like David Danced," but don't mimic all his dances. Don't mimic the dance he did called Bathsheba. Don't do that one. Don't do that one. Don't do that dance called Kill Uriah. Don't do that one. Don't do that one. Don't do that one. Don't do all David's dances. Do the dance when he was doing this. Do the dance when he was doing this. When he's on his face asking for forgiveness. But don't do all his dances. Because we need a king more just than David, more just than Solomon, more just than Hezekiah, more just than Josiah. And that one is God. This is what Psalm 11:7 says. For the Lord is righteous, he loves justice. The upright will see his face. You know why God is a more just God? Because God is all righteous. Back in the way day, there used to be a group that had a song, Jesus is just all right with me. Jesus is just all right, oh yeah. Jesus is just all right with me. And they were telling the truth because Jesus is all right because Jesus is all righteous. Because Jesus is God and God is all righteous. Because there's a word in the Hebrew called tzedek. Or it's either tzedek or sadek. But this word means both justice and righteousness. God is the only one that can fully contain both. In God, there is all justice. In God, there is all righteousness. This is why to really be a wise and just leader, we must pursue God. We can't pursue justice if we don't first pursue God. Now, think about this. Let's go back to the prostitute story for a minute. The prostitutes, they pursue King Solomon. They come before him seeking justice. We need to take that story and apply it to God. Because God loves justice. How do I know that God loves justice? When Cain killed Abel, God showed up with a just verdict. When God heard the cries of the Hebrews enslaved in Egypt, he showed up with a just verdict. God sent his son, Jesus, to provide a radical, revolutionary justice that we can't provide for our broken, wicked, evil, unjust souls. God is a God of justice, so we should pursue God to get the revolutionary, righteous justice that our souls and our nation needs. Let me go to Matthew chapter 9, when there was a story of a woman with an issue of blood. She had a disease and no doctor could address it. No health care plan could address it. No prescription could address it. No pharmaceutical company could address it. She couldn't get a shot for it. She couldn't take a pill for it. She couldn't find surgery for it. But she saw King Jesus and she said, if I could just press my way through the crowd and touch his clothes, I could be healed. I'm telling you, if you want to be a wise person of righteousness and justice, if you want to pursue justice in an unjust world, start out by pursuing the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. Press your way through the crowd. Bring the injustice of your soul to the King. Bring your burden to the King. Bring your headache to the King. Bring your stress to the King. Bring your anxiety to the King. Bring your divorce to the King. Bring your parenting to the King. Bring your finances to the King. Bring the midnight hour to the King. Bring your cancer to the King. Bring your brokenness to the King. Bring your abuse to the King. Bring your neglect to the King. Bring your stubbornness to the King. Bring your pride to the King. Bring unforgiveness to the King. Bring your past to the King. Bring your present to the King. Bring your future to the King. Bring your kids to the King. Bring your grandkids to the King. Bring your parents to the King. Bring your siblings to the King. Bring your block to the King. Bring your neighborhood to to the king. Bring your city to the king. Bring your state to the king. Bring your nation to the king. Bring the world to the king. Bring your career to the king. Bring your enemies to the king. Bring the neighbor to the king. Bring black people to the king. Bring white people to the king. Bring red people to the king. Bring yellow people to the king. Bring the rich to the king. Bring the poor to the king. Bring the arts to the king. Bring religion to the king. Bring medicine to the king. Bring education to the king. Bring science to the king. Bring mathematics to the king. Bring engineering to the king. Bring universities to the king. Bring charter schools to the king. Bring private schools to the king. Bring public schools to the king. Bring liquor stores to the king. Bring crack houses to the king. Bring prostitution houses to the king. Bring the club to the king. Bring the community college to the king. Bring the local store to the king. Bring the shopping mall to the king. Bring it all. Take me to the king. I don't have much to bring. My heart is aching. It's my offering. Lay me at the throne. Take me to the king. Take me to the king. Take me to the king.